Ecclesiastes 4, verses 1 through 12. Again I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought, the dead who are already dead more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. This also is vanity and a striving after the wind. The fool folds his hands and eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after the wind. Again, I saw vanity under the sun, one person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also is vanity and an unhappy business. 2 are better than 1. Because they have a good reward for their toil. Even if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? And though a man might prevail against one who is alone, 2 will withstand him. A 3-fold cord is not quickly broken. You may be seated.
All right, good morning, everyone. Guys doing all right? Surviving all things, heat waves and whatever. Went to see fireworks, was it Thursday night? And at like 10 o'clock at night, we were sweating, just sitting in the grass. It's crazy, but hopefully you're doing well. And how are you doing as we're working through Ecclesiastes here? Okay, we're on week 3. You guys okay? Nobody despairing of life yet? Nobody quit their job? Because he says it's toil. What's the profit of all this toil and whatnot? Maybe it's because it's summertime, thinking about going down to the shore. But I was thinking about the business of building sandcastles. As an interesting connection with Ecclesiastes. How many people, do we have people here who are passionate sandcastle builders? A couple, Alyssa, that's it? She's the only passionate? Wow. Okay, well, I'll put ourselves on the table then, I guess. When we go down and we build sandcastles, we don't mess around with little children's plastic toys or whatnot. We go into the garage and we grab our shovels and we take them down. And, we go down and we, stake out our plot, where we're at, and we go and we immediately start digging, and we're just digging this massive hole and then this massive mound, and then the family could jump in, and start picking apart. Come on, nobody else does this? Nobody else has architectural renderings, Joe, right, that you've planned out for the year, you've run it past John Schmidt, a structural engineer, whatever, and then you go out there and you build it? Yeah, okay, well, that's us, and and that's what we do for. Maybe we'll spend the whole day, building this sandcastle and just having fun building this castle. And I imagine that if Kohelet, the writer of Ecclesiastes, was sitting on a lawn, in a beach chair next to us, or down, he would be yelling, "What? Hevel, this is Hevel. What you're doing? You know what's coming at the end of the day, don't you?" Right? The tide is going to come in and lay waste. Or even before the tide gets there, you see that little boy over there who's been watching this whole thing? The moment you go up for dinner, guess what he's going to do? He's going to run and jump onto that thing and yeah, right? Or maybe he's watching and, one of your little kids or one of our kids, grabs one of those molds. You put the sand in and you put it down and you pull it up and there's like a little castle type thing. But you know how more often than not, what happens, you put the sand in there, you pack it down, you flip it upside down. If you manage to flip it up without it all falling off, then you slowly pull it up, and what happens? It just kind of crumbles, or the sand isn't wet enough, or whatever, or it's too wet, and it's sticking to the thing. And he would be yelling, "Hevel, you see that? You can't manipulate the sand to get it to work for your profit," or whatever. Okay, but on the other hand, maybe if you watched and you just noticed the fun that we're having just building the castle, not concerned about whatever reward from our labors is going to come. Nobody's going to come walking down the beach and say, oh, that's the best sandcastle I've seen all day. Here's $50 for your labor, right? And maybe if you just saw the enjoyment, then he would say, actually, that's not heaven. That's exactly what I'm talking about. Right? If you back it up just one verse to the end of the chapter from last week, right, how does he end? The end of chapter 3. Sorry, in verse 22. So I saw that there's nothing better than a man should just rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Right? And that, that's why we build sandcastles, because it's just fun. It's just kind of fun thing to do when you go down to the beach. We're not looking for profit or reward from all of our toil. It's just a fun thing to do. Right? And so Ecclesiastes, right, Kohelet, I feel like he's really been going after our work and our labor and our toil. And he's saying, why do we strive so much? For one, the created world is not such that you can manipulate it and grab hold of it and work it for your personal gain and for your personal pleasure. Or last week, even if you could do that, there's a season for everything under the sun, right? So there's going to be a season for laughing and for joy and maybe for prosperity. But rest assured, a season is coming for mourning, for grief, for sadness, and even death. So all this constant striving, what's it for? It's hevel, smoke. It's a grasping for the smoke, which is fleeting and cannot be constrained for your own personal gain, right? So there's nothing better than just enjoy what God gives you, part of which is your labor and your work. Today, he's getting into a little bit more than this other very serious problem for Kohelet that comes when we are constantly striving for profit and reward and benefit. And for him, he sees this as a major cause of so much injustice. Right? And he looks out and he sees just this pervasive injustice, and he sees almost like a pervasive hopelessness, that the oppressed are out there crying and no one even cares and no one's even listening. And he sees this to such a great extent that, man, if you thought he was in a bad mood the first 3 chapters, now you come to chapter 4 and he's saying, congratulations to those who have attained to death because they don't have to live through this. Or even better yet, congratulations to those who weren't even born and didn't have to bear the burden of seeing all this injustice, of seeing the cries and the tears of the oppressed, and no one cares. All right, so that's what he's going after today. And basically, we just kind of want to sit with him and let him poke at us with that. And you should know that, when I went into this week, I thought, okay, so this is going to be looking at Kohelet's take on justice and injustice, and so it's probably going to be a major theme. And then as I'm, working through the passage, and again reading through the book, I can't tell if he's more going after injustice or if he's more going after the way we go at work and how that plays into all the problems and injustice that are going on. So, but this I do know, he's not like... And this gets back to the whole business that we have to wrestle with this as wisdom literature. Kohelet is not like a justice warrior who's out there on the front lines, setting up his tents on a college campus to protest the injustices done to Palestinians, or whatever, and our involvement and all that. And he's not a justice warrior, or maybe more specifically, he's not a prophet who is kind of like a justice warrior and is calling God's people out for their neglect of the poor and the widows and the orphans and the sojourners, right? Things that God had commanded them to do when they got into his land of promise. That's not Kohelet. He's more of like a philosopher. He's going to sit down and he's going to tell you, hey, look, this is what I see. So I've looked out on all things under the sun. And here's what I consider to be better, right? So that's how we're going to approach it. We're going to look at the things that he sees as major problems, and then we're just going to see the things that he says, and I see this as better. Okay? And where we're actually going to start is verse 4. It seems like just a better place to start. So he says in verse 4, then I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from man's envy of his neighbor. This also is hevel, vanity, and a striving after wind. All right, look at that. Listen to what he's saying. I've surveyed it all. I've watched it all. I've had, he's writing as, in the persona of a king who can see all. And as he sees all, he sees that all toil and even all creativity and all skill in labor is all born out of this envy that we have of our neighbor. In our men's group yesterday, Bob Dykes was there, and he's a security guard up at what used to be Graterford Maximum State. And he was telling us how, one of the things that he noticed is, man, there's some really skilled people, in the prison system, like people who, he was saying, can take a light bulb and a bag of chips and somehow turn it into a functioning microwave, or are just extremely artistic or skillful or crafty, whatever, all these things. And so the mind obviously goes, man, if we can just harness that creativity and that skill and use it in productive, helpful ways. Right? And in the same way, I think Kohelet, he's looking out and he's saying, man, there are people that have such skill and creativity and ingenuity, but it's all born out of this envy that we have of our neighbor. And this is vanity, this is hevel, he says. And I think that envy, I think it's two things, at least as I see him talking about that throughout his book. I think on one hand, it is this envy that is born out of discontent, right? You have your shelter, you have your sustenance, you have your family, you have your life or whatever, but you just happen to look across the yard and there's, your neighbor who every night seems to be throwing grade A Angus T-bone steaks on the grill and filling the air with this glorious smell that is having you less than satisfied with your chicken and lentils or whatever you had, for dinner. Yesterday, I was on kid duty a bit for the morning, gave the kids nice breakfast, eggs, sausage. I gave them some lunch. They like these little roll-up things, tortilla shells, and you put some cheese or whatever, and I gave them that, and some fruit and stuff. Oh, they were thankful. Thank you for lunch. And they were great, and they were satisfied. Until we walked over to church, and Ed was here. He was doing some work. And apparently Madeline had just dropped off Chick-fil-A. And so there's Ed as soon as we walk in the door, and he's sitting there with his Chick-fil-A bag, eating a number 1 and also a number 2 or whatever else he had there going on as well too. And for my kids, they assume when the Bible says heaven, they really mean Chick-fil-A because that's their understanding of what heaven is, Chick-fil-A. And so immediately all that contentment that they had, when they walk in, they see what Ed's eating. Oh, wow, that contentment's out the window, right? And are we not like that in some ways? Like, you could be perfectly content were it not that you can see across the way, man, that he's got a newer car, doesn't have the oil leak or the Freon leak, so it's a nice, cool ride wherever he goes. He goes on nice vacations. I think I've mentioned here before that I think, at least me personally, I noticed just this deeper contentment in life with just our things. When I was living in perhaps the smallest house we've ever lived in, a nice little 2-bedroom cottage type thing. All the girls, they were smaller at the time, so it worked. We're all in one bedroom. At some point in time, we even had some foster kids, and they were in the other bedroom, so Amy and I would blow up an air mattress every night and sleep in the living room, and it was fine, and we were content, and we were just, I think, at least I was or whatever. And then I just noticed, so then, when later then we moved here, a bigger house, it's got a garage you can put stuff into. I think the salary's a little bit better, so there's more resources at the end of the day to do different things. But we're in Wallingford, which is, higher end of the state of Pennsylvania. People live way at a much higher level than they did out in Adams County where we were before, right? They have more stuff. They do more cooler things. They have more resources to invest. And maybe there's just that slightest bit of discontent that I find has come in. Oh, boy, wouldn't that be nice? And then you're scrolling through social media and you see people talking about all these little side hustles they do, and you start to think, oh man, if I could just do a little side hustle, maybe I could get a little bit more and we could do this. And Kohelet would be sitting there saying, hevel, do you not see? That's hevel. You were content. You had more than enough, and you look out and you envy your neighbor, and now you're thinking, how can I strive and get more and get more? All this striving, all born out of this envy and this discontent. I think the other part of that envy, too, is sort of like on a status level or maybe identity level in the way that, Nate was talking and praying for us. All right, the Bible, if anything, is very clear that, that the moment sin enters into the world, not only are we guilty in some sense, but everything is broken. In particular, shalom is broken. That fabric that, that was to tie our life together is broken. Our relationships with our Creator is broken as a result of sin. Our relationships with one another becomes broken as a result of sin. Even our relationship with His creation. And the thing is, all of these things were stuff that defined us, helped us understood who we were and what our purpose in life was all about. You can ask any psychologist or any anthropologist, and they would say, yeah, in generations past, really throughout all of history, we defined ourselves based on our tribe or our community or our faith and our understanding and our relationship with our Creator, right? But the sin comes and those things get torn apart as distance comes between us and our Creator, and we reject more of what His purpose is and His plan and His meaning for our life as we have these wedges built in relationship with others. Like, it's almost like we don't know who we are anymore. We live in this dysphoric state, right? And then in that state, what we do is we take our work, stuff that we were made to do and is part of our identity as creators, right? God calls, not creators, as the creation or creatures. God tells us, hey, be at work in my creation, steward it, cultivate it, guard the beauty and sanctity of it. But instead of finding our status, our identity, our meaning, our purpose just in work, we find it more in what we attain, right? In the next rung up the ladder or the title at the end of the name, right? And again, Kohelet would say, this too is hevel, right? The laborer who just has a wonderful little job that he goes and does, right? But then he's in a neighborhood where there are middle-level managers, right? And so he yearns for that. And so he's working now just to climb up the ladder so he can get to that status, so he can feel better about himself, make a name for himself, establish some permanency in life or whatever. That's hevel. Not to mention just because, well, maybe you attain to that status, you get a salary raise, and so you decide to go buy a bigger house with a bigger yard, and you look at your neighbors, and now they're all VPs and CFOs and CEOs, and now you're going to strive all over again. Hevel, he says, all of this born out of envy. And there's a reason. One of the 10 Commandments, don't envy and don't covet. Right? Not only is it sinful, but here the wisdom literature is saying, and it makes your life hevel and striving for what end, for what goal? The biggest problem, though, says Kohelet, is he sees this leading to injustice. Or more, I would say this, he sees when you take that broken approach to life and to work, and you add power to it, more often than not, you're going to get injustice, right? That's what he says there. I saw all the oppressions that are done under the sun, and behold, the tears of the oppressed, they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of the oppressors, there was power. And again, no one could comfort the oppressed. This would have been rampant in the ancient world. Kohelet, no doubt, would have seen plenty of times. Individual has a nice home, family, yard, lawn, whatever it is. Perfectly, but yet he's not content. And he's constantly scheming, how do I increase? How do I gain more? And so he sees a nice plot of land, or I want to buy that land. I want to add to my whatever I have, to my harvest, to my land, and all this. And the guy won't sell it to him, and he can't increase. And so he comes up with a mind, hey, you know what? I know this old widow that lives down on a beautiful plot of land that she and her husband had made or whatever. And he starts to scheme and to plot, how can I get a hold of that land? No, maybe I'll try some ancient predatory lender system, and I'll go and I'll offer help in her in the form of a loan, right? So that she can hire workers to come and to work the land and get a bigger harvest for herself. And then maybe I'll do it at such an enormous interest rate that she can't possibly pay it back. Or maybe I'll call the loan sometime, and when she can't pay it back, I'll say, well, that's fine, you can't pay it. I'll just take half your land. Oh, and she's going to go run to the town council or the people that sit at the gate and they decide for the affairs of their people. No problem. See, because I know those guys too. And they want to increase. and they're envious, and they're discontent, and they're looking for status and increase. So I'm just going to take a little money, I'm going to stick it in the back of their pocket, and they're going to decide for me. This is actually exactly what he says if you were to back it up again in verse 3, or chapter 3, verse 16. Moreover, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, in those places where people should be rendering just verdicts on behalf of the common person, even more so on behalf of those who can't defend themselves, there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, there was wickedness. Right? People scheme. If they've got the power and the wealth to accomplish their scheme, they can do it. And the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, as some would say. Right, if I think if Kohelet was alive today and he was surveying all under the sun today, he would start listing off examples of people who, maybe out of insecurity or this haunting desire to make a name for themselves, to make something lasting and permanent or whatever, they go and they build a business and they hire all these workers, but at the end of the day, the workers are just pawns for them and for their envy and their insecurities, and so they could care nothing about their physical, spiritual, emotional well-being or their safe workplaces, or whatever. And he would say, yeah, that's that injustice. Or maybe he would look at, I don't know, it's always sketchy if I start talking about anything remotely political, but you look at the lobby system, right, where people, as long as you can wield what resources you have to influence the positions in power, you can get them to work in your favor however you want. Right, or Supreme Courts that all of us undecided. It's perfectly okay to give gifts and things, whatever, to your congressmen or to your judges and justices. Or maybe, maybe he watched that political debate that was like a week or so ago. You guys watch that? And I'm sure for an hour and a half, he would be sitting there saying, Hevel, Hevel, Hevel. All of this is Hevel. But the part that would probably drive him mad is when, you get the moderators that are asking the question of, times are getting tough. Inflation is on the rise. People are having to work extra hours to make ends meet. But then there's this other problem. They're having a difficult time affording childcare. And so it's getting really difficult for people. And so what do you say to that? And what's your plan to help them? I don't know. And instead of answering the question or even caring about the cries of those who are having a hard time or suffering or missing out, instead they're going to talk about their golf game. Or instead they're going to talk about how this person is totally ruining our country, all this sort of stuff. And he was, that's what I'm talking about. You can differ politically on it. Please, I'm not making any sort of political statement. You can differ on all of that if you want to. Fine. But I do think that Kohelet, and maybe this is part of that wrestling with this wisdom literature, I do think Kohelet would say, here's this other thing that I notice happening in the modern day church or God's people, that any time somebody mentions the word systemic, it's like all of a sudden, or like talks about this systemic injustice, a justice that comes from the systems of power, or systemic race issues, or systemic economic inequality. Anytime anybody talks about that in God's people, I see this strange thing where, we don't want to talk about that, or we won't want to acknowledge that sort of thing exists, or that's just distracting from what our calling and our business and our mission is. I think Kohelet would say, if it's not God's people who are listening to the cries of the oppressed, who are taking notice of the tears of the oppressed, who in the world is going to do it? This breaks his heart. Better is the person dead, or better is the person who's never even born, that he would see injustice, see the apathy towards it that seems to exist in God's covenant people even, as he's writing as a good and faithful Israelite. All right, we could talk about that all day, but there's the problems. There's the things that I saw that are heavy and frustrating and despairing to me. Here's the better, he says. And first of all, I would say I would just borrow it again from last week, where he says, better is this. There's nothing better, he says, again in chapter 3:22, that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Right? As you go at your work, hey, watch out for this constant striving that is born of envy. Right? Go at your work if you can, freed from this constant striving for an increase in profit so that you can keep up with the Joneses across the street. Or watch out, make sure that you're not working because you're hopelessly insecure because you see the status of your neighbors and you have to rise to that status if you're going to feel any kind of value or meaning in your life. No, far better is it that you just enjoy your labor, he says. Or he says, in verse 5, he gives us a little bit of a riddle here, actually. He says, the fool folds his hand, eats his own flesh. Better is a handful of quietness than 2 hands full of toil and a striving after wind. This phrase is actually interesting. He uses, in the Hebrew, 3 different words for hands. There's 3 different words in the Hebrew for hands, and he uses all 3 of them. He uses yod there in verse 5. The fool folds his yod. And in the Hebrew, that refers to everything from the hands all the way up to the elbow. So it includes the forearms. So here's the picture, right? The fool folds his yod like this, which is a picture of what? This is a resting pose, right? This is hands that are conveniently tucked away, so it's not working, it's not laboring, not toil. And Kohelet says, that's not good. That's the foolish thing, and you eat your own flesh. Again, God designed us to be workers in his creation, to cultivate it, to guard it, to steward it for his glory, right? Dangerous things happen when we become inactive. And not only that, if you're not working your fields, the only thing he seems to say you're going to have to eat is your own flesh, right? You become your own oppressor in a way. Okay, but he goes on to say, but better is a kaf. One kaf, that's the other word for hand, which is more of like this open hand so you can see the palm. So better is one open palm and another essentially with holding on to quietness or tranquility or rest. Then, how do I pronounce this? Is that one? This is the other one, the word there. Then this is one where you have to dig into your throat. Hoffen, to hoffen, which is more the idea of hands that are closed or hands that are grasping, right? So better is one hand that's palm open, receiving whatever from your work or whatever God has for that day, and then the other hand is holding on to quietness and tranquility versus 2 hands that are doing a lot of this, which is both toil, constant work, workaholic, right? And trying to grasp at things, right? Constantly working to strive, to gain, to increase in profit and prosperity. Better is one hand that is just open and receives whatever God has for you from your labor and from your life, with your other hand enjoying rest and tranquility and peacefulness versus the hands that are doing this. Okay, so far better is it that you just enjoy your work. Better is it not that you're not working or that you're overworking, but that you're just receiving through your work and resting. And then there's one other better that he has on here. He says in verse 7, again, I saw vanity under the sun. I saw hevel under the sun. One person who has no other, either son or brother. Yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches, so that he never even asks, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of pleasure? This also, hevel, and an unhappy business, he says. Right? The person out there, right, if you want something done, you just got to do it yourself, has learned a long time ago. You can accomplish way more, way faster, if you just go at it and you do it yourself. And he does it on his own, leaving the community behind, leaving the family behind, leaving brother and son, whatever, and goes at it. And here's the madness of it for Kohelet. He never stops to ask, for what end? And to whom does all this go at the end of the day? And why do you deny yourself whatever pleasures God might have for you in this constant striving? Far better, he says, verse 9, are 2 than 1, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if they fall, one will lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has not another to lift him up. Again, if 2 lie together, they keep warm. But how can 1 keep warm? And though a man might prevail against 1 who is alone, 2 will withstand him. let alone a threefold cord, which is not quickly broken. He's using scenarios that anybody in the ancient world would have been very mindful of. Probably like, their mind would probably go like if you're on a journey in the ancient world. It's better to go with the buddy system than go at it alone, right? Because in the ancient world, they didn't have nice, neatly paved roads and sidewalks. It was rocky terrain. It was up and down hills with cliffs and ravines. Very easy for somebody to twist an ankle, for everybody, very easy to slide, fall down the hill. And if you're on your own and your ankle's twisted and you're gonna hobble, you're gonna hop all the way back into town. Better to have one alongside you who can pick you up in your time of weakness. Or in the ancient world, if you're going on an overnight journey because you don't have a fancy car that can get you there in a short amount of time, you also don't have fancy tents and sleeping bags, right? So what kept you warm was your cloak and your companion, right? You slept close together with that cloak over top that would trap body heat. That's part of how you stay warm. Or if you're traveling and a predator comes, thieves are hiding in the ravines, or these wild animals are coming, better is two, or better even yet is three, right? And that's what he's, there's this movement in this passage from this almost like isolated, frenzied pursuit of more out of envy and insecurity, which isolates individuals, which causes all this injustice. It's this movement from that towards this life that is lived in relationship and lived in community, that is lived using the buddy system so that when you fall down, there's someone there to pick you up. Or when the elements come and they rage against you and it is a heavy burden, there's someone there to carry it with you and to share what resources they have to uphold you. And I tell people all the time if we're having counseling session or just chatting one-on-one, inevitably, if we're talking about issues, inevitably my question will ultimately come, and where's your infrastructure of support? Where are the people in your life who are going to carry you when you stumble? Right? Where are the people who, when they can see that, the elements of life or the circumstances you're facing are beaten down hard on you, are going to be there to ease the burden, to bring comfort? Who are the ones when there are all these threats in life that might be coming at you from who knows where, are going to be faithful prayer warriors for you and are going to be faithfully checking in and trying to help you out and ward off what's coming your way? And I tell people all the time, if you don't have that infrastructure, I have no confidence. You can be the best person, the strongest person in the world. I have no confidence that when those elements rage and when you hit that season of grief and mourning and struggle, that you're going to be able to stand on your 2 feet, because we're not made that way. Always we're meant to live, to work, to enjoy life in community and in relationship. This was a big impetus, we've talked about this too, behind our wanting to have grace groups here at church, right? We found that, it's a very warm, loving congregation. It feels like family. But then as we would start to ask people, but who knows where you're going to be struggling tomorrow, so that they can be praying for you in that. Or maybe checking in on with you at the end of the day. How you do? Did you survive that? I don't know who knows what I'm going to struggle with tomorrow. I don't know who knows where my weaknesses are and is going to hold me accountable and pray for me in that. And this is all just maybe to put in a plug, that if you're here this morning, you're part of Grace Church, but you're not, if you don't have that, you're missing out. That's part of what the business of the life of the church is all about, right? So we always say, hey, grace groups are one of the places where we really try to be intentional about doing that, about not only growing in Christ, but doing it together. And learning where we're struggling, where we're weak, where the elements are beaten down on us so that we can pray for one another, so we can come along and pick each other up and walk through that, right? And so, especially now in the summer, now's the time if you're interested in that, either in the summer or the fall, come talk to me. Don't go through life at Grace Church without that better companionship that Kohelet is talking about here, okay? So there it is, right? There's the evil, the injustice, the despairing stuff that he sees as he surveys life under the sun. And what's the better? Well, that you enjoy your toil, free of insecurity, free of discontent, that you are able to go at your work with one hand open and one hand clinging to rest and tranquility and peacefulness, and that you're doing it together in community. Not as this individualistic, solitary endeavor where you're trying to increase and add or whatever, but you're doing it, life, work, all of it in community with your brothers and sisters. And lastly, as we close it up, we'll do like we're going to probably do week in and week out here. Okay, Kohelet, we see what you see, right? But we also live from the vantage point of seeing things that you didn't see because it wasn't time yet, right? We live from the vantage point of seeing the day when God would blow your mind in that he would, as John 1 writes, take on flesh and tabernacle among us, so that he could be a perfect companion to us through whatever life brings our way in the person of Jesus Christ. Or we saw God in the person of Jesus Christ fully free from envy and coveting and this desire for more, and fully free of status, so much that he would leave the glories of heaven, or as Paul writes in Philippians, though he was in the very nature God himself, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped, but emptied himself, taking on the form of a what? A servant or a slave, so that he might even be the better companion to you when all of your sin and your brokenness was raging against you. Right? We live on the back end of seeing this Jesus who came and not only saw those who, could work life in his favor, right? He wasn't one who just could see those who were in power and who had things to offer him, but his eyes were uniquely bent towards the poor and the oppressed. Right? This Jesus who, when he opens his mouth and starts preaching in the beginning of Luke, says, he grabs from Isaiah and says, the time is fulfilled. I am here with good news for the poor, recovery of sight for the blind, announcing the day of God's release for those who are oppressed. Right? This Jesus who, more than anything, wanted you to be restored in relationship with him, with one another, with his broken creation, such that he would lay down his life, suffer all the injustice, all the sinfulness, all the brokenness, so you could be delivered from it. And so here's the thing, right? I think from Ecclesiastes, from Kohelet's vantage point, this is sometimes the annoying part about philosophers. They tell you the problem. They tell you what I think would be better. They don't tell you how to get there and how to do it, right? How to live that out. But I bet you if he could have lived and seen this, the incarnation of Christ, the death and resurrection of Christ, he would have said, I can tell you how to do that. It's all about that open hand that just receives all the gifts that God has for you, including himself, who would come and give of himself in the person of Christ, who would come and give of himself in his Holy Spirit for you. Right? And boy, as you live life in that open hand and you receive that daily and you give thanks for that and you internalize that and you process it, you might find, I'm living free from that hevel of envy. I don't have that insecurity as much as I did yesterday because, like as Nate prayed, I hear God calling me, beloved son and daughter. Not because of myself, not because of what I've accomplished and toiled for myself, but simply because he loves me. And because Christ has come and absolved me of my sinfulness and has placed on me his glorious robes of righteousness. Right? So I know that with confidence, because he promises it, I'm going to finish the work, and one day you'll stand before your Creator and you'll hear these wonderful words, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Right? And as I internalize that and I hear that, maybe now I can go at my work not clamoring and striving for status and meaning and purpose because, I've been given this all in Christ. Or maybe, as I hear Peter say, this Jesus who has caused us to be born again to a living hope through the resurrection of dead, to this eternal inheritance that is unperishing, unfading, undefiled, kept in heaven for us, who are being guarded until that great day of salvation, right? When I receive that daily and I know what's coming and that I'm going to be a full participant in the inheritance of Christ himself, okay, maybe that frees me just a little bit from, right now trying to grab heaven and wrench it into the present because my neighbor seems to have a little bit more of it, and I'm envious of that. Or maybe then when I see that Jesus' first order of business, when he was enthroned at the right hand of the Father as king over creation, was actually to give another gift, to give the gift of his Spirit and to pour that out, right? And when I see that gift it's the Spirit that cries out, Abba, Father, within me. Or it's the Spirit that not only helps me live in communion with Christ and my Creator, but also with one another. Well, then, now I'm going to live my life leaning into that Spirit, trying to draw grace and strength from that Spirit, letting him remind me who I am, letting him draw me in love, Christ-like sacrificial love for my brothers and sisters, and help me live into that rich, better that Kohelet talks about. So how you doing? Right, how you doing with all that? Right, you see what Kohelet says? I see the hevel, I see the injustice, I see the better. Where are you in that? Right? And maybe I would just ask as well too, where are you in this receiving, not just one day in the past, wherever, maybe a day here and there, but every day, the wonderful gift of Christ and all that offers you so that you can live free of some of these other things that keep you from enjoying what else God would have for you. And if for any reason that's hard to come by for you, I'll just press two other real quick things for you. One, I'll give you an assignment. Go read the scriptures and study the business of the Sabbath. Right? Sabbath is that thing you're supposed to keep in your pocket and hold on to that other hand. With your other hand, that gives you that rest and tranquility and peacefulness. Hey, take a day and let go of the toiling. And look, you'll find, this is my creation, I got it, I'm going to maintain it. Or let go of the toiling. You're my beloved sons and daughter. I got you. If I clothe the lilies of the field and care for the birds of the air, I'm going to care for you. You can let go. And you can let go and be attentive to what else I want to give you in Christ today. And then the other thing would be come to the table, which is where we're going to go next. Come to the communion table. Because we believe that as we come to the table, it's not just this empty ritualistic exercise that we're doing. It's not even just a mere act of remembrance. But as we come to the table, we believe that God in faith meets with us. And as Paul says, it is a communing with Christ by his Spirit and one another. Right? All this better stuff that Kohelet would invite us to. And so I'm going to invite the worship team to come on forward. Pastor Mark's going to eventually come up as well too. He'll pray over the elements and things. But this is something that we do here regularly. We do it monthly here. Again, not as just some empty ritual, but as part of our communing and delighting in and enjoying all that Christ is and all that he offers so that we may play our part as faithful workers in his creation. We say, every time we do it, that you don't have to be a member of Grace Church, a regular participant even of Grace Church. If it's your desire to enjoy this Jesus and to live more faithfully as his servant, by all means, come to the table and receive grace upon grace. If you're not sure, if you still have questions, you wouldn't consider yourself a follower of Jesus or whatever, hey, it's great that you're here. And I'm glad you're asking those questions and wrestling with Kohelet with us as we work through this. Scripture would say, don't come to the table unless it's a sincere coming, a humble coming, as it has been another theme. I am in desperate need of mercy and grace. I want to receive Christ and the joy that he offers to me. If that's your desire, let's stand together. We're going to sing. And do we have ushers that are directing traffic today? Joe, is that you? We do? Okay, great. Why don't we stand together? We have ushers up here. They'll help direct folks to the table to keep the traffic flowing. Let's sing.